Hello folks, this is Stewardship out here in the pollinator garden at the Habitat, and I'm here to give some positive press to pollinators. Pollinators, bees, bugs, bats, hummingbirds, they're important for over a third of the food that you eat. Did you know that? In pollinator land, there's many different kinds of flowers. Some are nice, simple, regular flowers with 4 petals or 5 petals. Others are tubular in shape, forcing bees or pollinators with long tongues or a long beak like a hummingbird to be able to get them. Or other flowers have pollen readily accessible so bees and pollinators with short tongues can get to them. So plants make flowers to reproduce, and part of that reproduction involves what's called pollination. And pollination simply means moving pollen from one flower to another flower of the same species, but a different plant. The pollen will travel down the female part of the pistil. It will fertilize eggs in the ovary. The petals, no longer needed for advertising, will fade away. The ovary will swell into a fruit, and here is the fruit of the poppy. So this guy used to be an ovary, and it has swollen up, and once this gets a little older and dries, it'll be full of seeds. And so the big puzzle is, how does the plant do it? The plant can't walk around and mate with another flower or something, so it needs pollinators, pollen deliverers. And that's where bees and butterflies and hummingbirds come in. Honeybees and bumblebees are the only bees around here that form colonies, but they are not the only bees. About 98% of the bees in bee land are solitary bees, native solitary bees, and they don't form a colony. Honeybees, of course, will find a little hollow in a tree and use their wax glands to make a honeycomb and hatch out a bunch of workers to do the job. Bumblebees are interesting. They're a year-long thing. They're an annual species, whereas honeybees can live or the queen can live, I guess, up to 5 years. So we have this handsome yellow-faced bumblebee. This is one of the most common pollinators here in the spring, and it's one of several species of bumblebees that we find here. You can see the pollen on her corbicula or her pollen baskets on her back leg. And this bee is pollinating this plant called penstemon. Now he's not doing that because he's trying to help out the plant. He's getting something for the deal. He's getting pollen, she is getting pollen that she's going to feed to her young, and she's getting nectar to make honey to also feed to the young. But the plant is getting pollen spread from one plant to another, and that will help the plant reproduce. So this is a good example of mutualism. 2 species living closely together, and they're each getting something out of the deal. And you can get really close to these bumblebees. Pollinators are gentle, and bees, there's nothing to be afraid about bees. They're not aggressive creatures or anything. So I'm assuming that this is a female bumblebee. The females, the workers, they're the ones that are out there gathering the pollen, and they do kind of what this one does, is where they get pollen all over their hairs, and they have little spines like combs on their legs, and they comb it and pack it on their back legs, all the pollen. They sometimes mix a little nectar with it, and they pack it on their back legs like a suitcase. And this bumblebee might have been doing that. She also might have just been kind of warming up a little bit, doing some little exercises that they do to kind of warm up. Okay, so honeybees are important pollinators, really important in agriculture in this country. It's interesting, though, that honeybees are a non-native. They came over to the country in the early days with the colonists and stuff, and then they made it to California around the gold rush. So it's kind of interesting that here's this bee that everybody thinks is America's bee, it's everywhere, is actually a non-native. Honeybees, as a lot of people know, like many bees, are in a big population decline. And there's lots of suspects. It could be these neonicotinoid, these pesticides that are harming a lot of bees. Others are a non-native mite, the varroa mite, that gets into their breathing system and causes difficulty. But all of these things cause this colony collapse disorder, which is causing, again, this drastic decline in honeybees. And honeybees are really important pollinators to our food. Butterflies are no different than bees. They're attracted by color, by scents, and by nectar. And you can see these flowers, they've evolved all these beautiful colors, beautiful scents, and yummy rewards to induce pollinators to come in and inadvertently spread the pollen from plant to plant. And butterflies, they'll land on a flower and you'll see them stick out their long little straw-like mouth part and kind of probe around like a little feeler and antenna, and they're sipping nectar out of each one of those little flowers, if it's on a daisy-like flower or if it's on another flower. So again, the plant is using the insect in a very clever way to distribute its pollen. Hummingbirds are important pollinators, and one of the advantages hummingbirds have over some of these insects is they are able to access some of that yummy nectar deep in tubular flowers, where maybe bees that are too big to crawl into the tube, or bees that don't have a long enough tongue can't get into the nectar. The hummingbirds, with their long beak, can access that nectar and of course inadvertently get pollen on them and spread that pollen from plant to plant. You know, there's a lot of bad vibes out there towards flies and the human community, and I'm here to give the flies a little positive press. I know a lot of you out there are chocoholics. Chocolate. Do you realize chocolate is pollinated by a fly? Yep, you wouldn't have chocolate without the flies. Many flies are important pollinators. Only a few species are vectors for disease or annoying. Most flies are harmless and are beautiful, and many of them are pollinators, including the hoverflies. You'll see hoverflies in your yards all over the place. They look a little like yellow jackets. They've evolved that coloration to mimic them, but they're harmless and they're important pollinators. And as a larvae, they're also important predators on aphids and such. So give the flies some love. They're important. So pollinators are critical to our food supply, but they're also critical to the health of ecosystems. Without pollinators, all these plants in various habitats, in grasslands and wildflower lands and forests and farms, without the pollinators, these plants aren't growing. And one of the keys to this is you want to attract a lot of pollinators. You want to promote a diversity of pollinators. And there are many, many species in our lands that will do all this pollination if we give them an opportunity to live. Some farms are applying more environmentally friendly practices and helping out pollinators. They're doing this by planting native plants near their farm crops and planting a greater diversity of farm crops. These two things will provide more food for pollinators, and it also provides food for insects that are valuable as predators and such. So a greater variety of plants, both wild and farm plants, will help pollinators and in the long term help the environment and ourselves. Okay, my good friends, if you like pollinators, if you want to help them, it's easy. All you got to do is plant them and they will come. And I want you to look at this beautiful little corner of our school here at CMS. It used to have this hideous juniper plant that was ugly and didn't attract a single bee from anywhere. And now look at it. It's beautiful. And it's so easy. All you got to do is plant some of the right plants and let nature do its thing. They're drought resistant. They're beautiful. They provide nectar and pollen for pollinators. Oh man, you'll really like it. You'll enjoy watching them in your yard. I've done this. I destroyed my lawn and replaced it with natives. Now I'm out there every day, like a TV, watching my little pollinators and taking pictures and such. It's a great way for you to help. Here are some important little tips. Planting big patches of the same species, that will help. Planting a diverse palette. If you could get up to 10 or 20 different kinds of native species, that's the way to do it. You want to plant plants so that you have something in flower from spring all the way through fall. Those three things, big patches, diversity, flowering plants, different flowering ones, all through the season. That'll help pollinators. Go to UC Berkeley Bee Gardens online and you'll find a list of all the plants that you need to know. Or go to the Xerces Society, Xerces or something like that, and they'll tell you all sorts of native plants that you can get to help natives, to help pollinators. And you, of course, can buy all these things at MEarth.
You might be surprised how much diversity can be found in your own backyard and neighboring outdoor spaces. Send us your questions and comments below. If you enjoyed this video, share it on Facebook and Instagram or email it to a friend. Share your findings with your virtual community and tag us at MEarthCarmel with the hashtag GrowCookExplore. See you in the next video.
You get him? You got him.